Looks like deportations are back on our menu, boys.
The question of the hour, is a constitutional crisis now officially upon us? From the invocation of an 18th century law that was the basis for some of the darkest chapters in America's history, things like the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, now being used to deport hundreds of people, to the sudden removal of an immigrant doctor here legally, both moves seemingly from what we know at this hour, at the time in open defiance of court orders.
Ah, that's a shame.
Trying to shame Donald Trump is like playing pin the tail on the donkey with a nudist. You can cry, you can whine, you can pay armed FBI agents to raid Melania's underwear drawer for democracy, but T-Money's been overdrawn at the give-a-shit bank for a beat and a half, and the Democratic Party has the approval rating of an anal polyp, so you can go ahead and quit pretending you have a half ounce of leverage any day now, DNC. I've been telling you people, even those of you who keep keister in the black pill suppository for some reason, that every rubber band can only stretch so far in a single direction before it ultimately snaps. Just look at Bill Burr's facelift. Look, it's not a prediction. It's not a threat. It ain't folksy colloquial copium. It's a fact as immovable as Bret Michaels' bandana. Don't bitch, bellyache, or bloviate, because second-term Trump is the president you made him, Mensheviks. Look, I get it. I almost lost my channel due to false flagging from a corrupt county recorder, and if Arizona politicians are bothering with a dude who does dick jokes for a living, we are well through the other side of the Huxleyan looking glass. You think you're sick of authoritarian government? I am sick semper tyrannis. But the blame falls on the feckless left, who for inelucidable reasons have for 15 years or more appeared to labor under the delusion that no matter how corrupt they become, it will never amount to anything because they will never be out of power. We are indeed wading out into the breakers of a truly poisonous pond here, folks. An era of almost unprecedented accretion of presidential authority that'd have George Washington strapping on the saber and loading his musket with libertarian intent. And yet the admitted executive overreach is, at present, also profoundly necessary. Look, the Supreme Court can bang their gavels and iron their graduation gowns all they like, and overreach initiated at the executive level can only be redressed at the executive level. I say almost unprecedented because, well, I mean, that little old Lincoln episode absolutely happened, not to mention his ideological inheritors, FDR and Woody Wilson, though I have to be honest at this point, when the dust settles, I'd actually argue Joe Biden belongs in that agglomeration of despotic dong hammocks. When Abraham Lincoln locked up Francis Scott Key's grandson, absent charge or trial, for the unpardonable crime of crapping out an editorial about his descent into dictatorship, he only did so for 14 months. January 6 detainees spent 4 years, some in isolation no less, without charge, trial, or legal representation. And while the Lincolnite cucks in Congress did indeed later rubber stamp the suspension of habeas corpus, albeit months after Lincoln had already been abusing the self-same power, Biden never even pretended to require constitutional authority to initiate same. Between that and the near Leninist lockdowns and weaponization of the IRS and alphabet agencies, all to political purpose, I say without the slightest exaggeration, we have lived through one of the most despotic administrations in American history. One to rival Lincoln, Roosevelt, or Wilson's most profligate expressions of unmitigated Tim Korean legend, Mephistophelian evil. And speaking of such, we quietly confirmed this last week, as if anyone with an unobstructed ocular cortex weren't already aware, that Biden donated his brain to science before he was done using it, was deeply demented throughout, and towards the end amounted to little more than an Alzheimer's ravaged rubber stamp on an ever more maleficent agenda authored by a standing army of unelected ass canoes. Kind of puts that whole no one voted for Elon Musk agitprop into perspective, don't it? No one voted for Anthony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, or for that matter, Joe Biden, bitch. They still got to be president for the last 4 years, albeit with an asterisk the size of Stacey Abrams' tooth gap. And don't tell me Africa can't produce a president. I mean, look at Obama. Malik Obama, Godspeed, you mad melanin-suffused bastard. From mandates to man-woman surgeries, Biden's first several violations of the Constitution were so well received, he decided to go ahead and turn it into a series. Worse still, due to the miracle of unelected bureaucracy, it's now in its 5th season. A wise man once said that for every action, there is an equal and opposite government program. And so from FBI obstruction of the Epstein files to judges so libidinous they swear in witnesses on a stack of penthouse magazines, we went from being ignored by our public officials to being stalked by them. No wonder the ACLU doesn't want the 10 commandments in the courthouse. They burst into flame, but nobody's lighting up like Trump. As of this week, the Dawn done declared each and every pre-pardon issued by Biden's skin puppet void and vacant, not unlike the man himself. Pelosi, Hunter, Michael Steele, Danielle Steele. If you're an agent of the understate, you are officially excommunicated from Candyland. A complication indeed when you consider the steadily rising likelihood that employees of the alphabet soup agencies likely illegally concealed documents pertaining to Epstein's perpetual preteen pooper party, many of whom may have thought better of the action had they realized their preemptive pardon, much like Biden's birth certificate, had an expiration date. Whether they merely concealed the documents or ganked them harder than Styx Hexenhammer stole my wardrobe, the operative effects are unchanged, particularly with President Poopy Pants exchanging the White House for the White Hospice. Gang, Biden is approaching 90, and one look at the back of his head and you can tell from which direction. Even if he, or rather his wife operating the life-size president puppet, were actually inclined to intercede on their behalf, they've got issues of their own. Many MAGA folks may not want to hear this, but when Biden said he would never pardon Hunter, he was, for the first time in decades, actually telling the truth. Not because he's a paragon of truth-telling, Biden lies at the Olympic level, but because he had quietly engineered an entirely different scam to get Hunter off the hook. An IRS DOJ plea bargain for little boy Blow that would have amounted to the lightest slap on the wrist since Clinton used an overweight intern as a hoo-hoo humidor. And then the Trump 2.0 update dropped on election day, and the DOJ dropped the plan entirely. Likely because Biden, at this time at least, refused to grant them a preemptive pardon as well. And so, waiting until the inauguration festivities were hogging all the headlines, Biden dropped more pardons than a Canadian mosh pit. An 11th hour inauguration day ass ramming of truly historic proportion. And an abuse so blatant you would have thought it was dating Amber Heard. And Dems defended it. It was merely a fear of political revenge, they chortled, while updating their passports in unison. But as I also intimated at the time, this amounted to an admission of guilt. Revenge never takes place in isolation. It's reprisal, a sequel. For an act to constitute revenge, there must be an original offense to avenge it all. You pushed us to this point, and now it's dog-eat dogma, dickhead. You never hear the winning team say, well, guys, it's only a game. And you never hear cultural Marxists menstruate about the dangers of dictatorship when it's their firing squad leveling the rifles. So don't cry or drop a dump in your depends about democratic principles or conscientious conservatism, because when the world locked down and entire families got to watch Gammy die slowly over Skype, it was conscientious conservatism that was cutting the COVID checks. I like almost everything Thomas Massey stands for and almost nothing that escapes his goofy grandstanding mouth. We tried compassionate conservatism in the 90s and McCain conciliation in the aughts, and all it got us was 8 years of Obama with a Biden DLC. So every time this forward Coleman just for men gel using jagoff mugs the cameras and cries about constitutionalism and the need for open borders in an age where his own voters were locked up for 4 years for the crime of crossing a velvet rope, all while the southern border perpetually hosts the running of the Mexicans, I don't think my country 'tis of thee. I don't cup my hands and say amen. I think out of 100,000 sperm, how the hell was this prick the fastest? I'm Razor Fist. Godspeed.
Again from the judge. Judge Boasberg said this, quote, "You shall inform your clients of this immediately, and that any plane containing these folks that is going to take off or is in the air needs to be returned to the U.S. But those people need to be returned to the United States. Could not be clearer. Turn the planes around. The people do not get off the planes." And yet, Again, from everything we know at this hour, those migrants deported under that law appear to have been deported anyway.
Oh, you hate to see that.